Hey, this is Double R. And I wanted to tell you that Anchor by Spotify is a great and easy way to make a podcast with everything you need and all in one place. Anchor has the tools to allow you to record, edit your podcast straight from your phone or your computer. When hosting with Anchor, you can distribute your podcast to all listening platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Best of all, it's totally free. So go down the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. This is the Let's Roll Podcast with your host, Double R. What's up, everybody? It's Double R, the host of Rose and Mose, and this is the Let's Roll Podcast. Today's episode is Disabled Privilege. Everybody's got some kind of privilege. In today's episode, I discuss my disabled privilege, what the benefits of having a disability, and much more in this episode. And we'll get into it right after this. All right, guys. So let's talk about privilege and let's talk about privilege and disability privilege. So everybody has privilege. The biggest privilege out there in common privilege would be if you're white. I mean, that's a race thing, and that's just the way this country is, and it's not a good thing necessarily. But everybody has some kind of privilege, and sometimes you don't even realize you have that privilege until it's pointed out to you. I wanted to do this episode kind of a play on the whole privilege thing, and that's why I called it the disabled privilege. Disabled privilege, there's some perks to it. I mean, be real. Sometimes you're the most popular person in the room because of your disability. You also, the biggest one for me was always getting ahead of any kind of line. Being in a movie, at a movie, concert, theme park, anything that had a line that we had to go get into, stand in or sit in, however you want to say it, most of the time I could get past that line. I could get to the head of the line. I could bypass the line altogether. We even also sometimes have the ability to exit, a facility easier and safer by just being disabled. I mean, I have the saying that I always say that I am only disabled when I need to be. Benefits me a privilege. I can either say I'm disabled enough for you to help me do X, Y, and Z, or I can say, no, I'm not disabled enough. I can't do X, Y, and Z. So those are some advantages of that. I mean, I always joke when I'm dealing with somebody like somebody coming to do work on the house, or even like a local business or whatever. Somebody I'm comfortable enough to go, hey, can I get that handicap discount? And that's a joke. Sometimes they still give it and they go ahead and give me a discount. But that's more of a joke. But there is a privilege. There is a privilege to being disabled because we do. I mean, I would say majority of people that are not disabled look at someone disabled not necessarily that they're lesser than, but there's a lot of people out there that just immediately want to help, and that is a privilege because we're disabled. It's like we get ahead of the game sometimes because of our disability. Now, on the flip side of that coin, some things that we don't get ahead of, some things that work against us being disabled. The primary one that I could say that has really worked against me is the ability to get a job. Sometimes it's hard to convince someone to hire me and someone with a disability because they look at it, there's a lot of factors, hiring someone with a disability. So that's not a privilege, that's a disprivilege. That just totally goes against you. Like being in a wheelchair doesn't always help your case, or being disabled doesn't always help your case. So that could be a negative. Now, it also could be a positive in that situation because maybe you convince them like, hey, look, just because I'm in a wheelchair, I can work here and I can do the job and I can do this. And it becomes more of a benefit to them because now they're seen as an employer that not only, hires someone that's disabled, but allows that person to succeed in, that company or that business, just in that they're disabled. So there's two sides to every situation here. So I'm trying to think of some other privileges I would have. Well, we got parking, obviously. We got, assigned parking, handicap parking. It's funny how we call it handicap parking. Why don't we call it disabled parking? Oh, I don't care. I don't get offended by the word disabled or handicap or crippled. I don't. I mean, whatever. It's just a word. If you give the word meaning, then it becomes offensive to some. It'll it'll be celebrated by others, defensive by some. But if you give that word meaning, that's what happens. So if you're giving that word meaning, the meaning of the word is a negative one, then it becomes a negative word. I don't look at it that way. I mean, it's just another way to describe, another way to say what I am or subscribe. I know, probably not saying the right word, but to subs- I want to say subscribe, but it's not subscribe. Anyway, you know what I'm trying to say. It's basically just another word to say who or what I am. I've heard people go, "Hey, I'm looking for blah blah blah. He's a little guy in a wheelchair, or he's a disabled man, or I've never heard anybody say a crippled man or a handicapped man. I might have heard him say handicap, which I don't care. That those things don't bother me whatsoever. I mean, if it bothers other people that are disabled, okay, you have the right to be bothered by it. In my opinion, you're giving that word meaning by letting it bother you. You choose what you give meaning to, and try not to give meaning to it in a negative way, and it won't bother you. You won't get upset about it every time you hear it. See, I'm trying to sit here and think of other privileges that I have by being disabled. Sometimes I get better service at restaurants. In school, not only did I get ahead of the line, but I got to leave class a little bit before everybody to get to my next class. I got to leave a little bit early to get on the bus to go home. And that was mainly to avoid, at least in my case, avoid getting hurt in the hallway with all kids and teenagers and whatever. I was able to get out of the way before anybody was released. Let's see, what else? Obviously, we have along with handicap parking, we have handicap seating at venues, which is, sometimes a good thing, sometimes a bad thing. Just the way, like for example, movie theaters. Movie theaters can only really be designed one way, especially the smaller ones, and that puts the disabled or handicapped seating kind of down at the bottom. Sometimes it's kind of in the middle, the way the theater's designed, but it's basically at the bottom. Like, unless it's a big giant like IMAX or just a bigger theater, like a special type of theater, then you might have handicap seating way at the top, at the back. But unfortunately, we are stuck with what we get, but at least we have a spot to be able to sit and watch a movie, or like going to a stadium. Stadiums are a little bit better because they have handicap seating pretty much all over the place. I mean, as far as on each level, it's not. And most of the time in stadiums, they're always at the top of whatever level. So they're never down like the bottom row, because most of the time they have steps that go all the way down. So our seating is pretty much at the top of each section or level. So that's pretty cool. I can't really think of, I mean, like off the top of my head, pretty much all these privileges kind of run together, and it's an overall, like, we get special treatment, positive special treatment, and in a lot of cases we also get some negative treatment. And I haven't come across a lot of the negative treatment. I mainly have come across that when I was applying for jobs, and that's something I want to talk about in another episode. But I've never, nobody's ever treated me bad other than, because of my disability, other than work related stuff. But we do have a privilege. We we just don't have, like, all privileges are different. And let's talk about that right after this. Like I said at the top of the episode, I brought up white privilege, and, you know, the white privilege has always been played in talking about race. And I'm not saying that it doesn't exist, because it does. I think most white Americans or Caucasians don't realize the power they have of their privilege, because they just take it for granted. Like, they don't really think about, like, they're getting special treatment because you're white. You're getting the head of the game because you're white. You're getting the nicest stuff because you're white. Like, they don't really think of it that way. And even I don't even think of it that way for the most part. Again, I joke about disabled privilege, and I know that my privilege, I recognize it more than I would recognize I got this because I was white, or have more opportunities because I was white. Sometimes I jokingly say that just me being white and having white privilege, my disabled privilege trumps that. Like, in other words, the white privilege part doesn't always play in my favor. And I jokingly say that, this is kind of a little bit of a story here, and you'll probably hear this story again in another episode. But my boss at the time was Mexican, and he was legal to be in the country, but he was still considered, not American. And he definitely wasn't white. And he looked at me one day and he's like, "Man, you got it made." What? What do you mean I got it made? I don't, well, you might have it made. He said, "Well, you do, because you're white." And I looked at him and I said, "Do you see what I'm sitting in? Like, I'm in a wheelchair. I'm disabled. Me being white just got thrown out the window because of my disability. Like, I don't get any, at least I don't feel like I do. And maybe I do, and I don't see it. But I don't feel like I get a lot of privilege or have a lot of privilege because I'm white." Now, that being said, me and my friend, who is black, we went out to the movies and went out to eat. And the one thing that my friend noticed that I did not pick up on, and it could easily been because he was black, but the waitress that was white handed me my receipt to me with a pen. And she took my friend's receipt. I just set it on the table beside him. Didn't even acknowledge him, like, to say, "Hey, here's your receipt." And my friend immediately looked at me and goes, "You see what she just did?" And I didn't catch on at first. And he kind of said, "She handed your receipt to you and acknowledged you, but she didn't acknowledge me or hand me my receipt." And I'm like, okay, well, I didn't see it. And I'm not disagreeing with him. Like, it actually happened, but do I question the reasoning for it happening? Maybe. But again, that is, was that because I was white, or was that because he was black? Like, did my privilege come into play because I was white? I don't know. Maybe. I guess because I am not treated in a way that a black man or a black person would be treated, I'm going to say I don't pay attention to it, or I don't make a big deal out of something like that. I guess if I was treated the same way, I probably would. If I was treated in a way that because of my disability, I wasn't, you're only treating me this way because I'm in a wheelchair and have a disability, discriminating. Oh, you can bet I'm going to say something. I'm going to say something, and I'm going to raise a little bit of Cain about it. Like, I would not go silent. Now, I do pick my battles. Like, I don't jump on every time I'm being treated bad, but I will speak up for myself when I do feel like I'm treated bad. I mean, I always say, don't treat me disabled, but remember that I'm disabled. That's simple. Like, you don't have to treat me like I'm a disabled person. I'm still a person. I still have feelings. I still have thoughts. I still have abilities. But when you get to a level with me that you're not even seeing my disability, that becomes a problem, because now you are not thinking about me being disabled in different circumstances. So, but in no way do I really don't think, unless somebody could point out some stuff to me that they've been around and say, "Well, see, that's because you were white." I don't see it. And again, most people don't see it. They don't realize it. they just, they don't think about it. So disability privilege, do I have it? Absolutely. Do I have white privilege? Yes. One kind of outweighs the other, in my opinion, but, I have both, I guess. Um, we all have some kind of privilege in our life. It's if we recognize it or not, or understand why we even have it. Some people don't even understand why. Like, why? Why does it matter if I'm disabled? Why does it matter if I'm white? Why does it matter, I don't look like everybody else? Well, why? Like, why are you making like propping me up because of these things? Either you're propping me up or you're kicking me down. So it's either way, but it's based on privilege and still everybody has it. They just don't recognize it. But those are my thoughts, my experiences on what I perceive as disabled privilege. And I hope y'all enjoyed the episode. Make sure you go and check us out at theletsrollpodcast.com. Follow us on all of our social media. Consider to become a Patreon, where we're going to have the original podcast that I was on with my friend called Tea Time with T Rich. Those episodes will be available on Patreon if you want to hear them. They are not the best in the world, not the best quality in the world, but we started that back in 2011 and only went for maybe a little over a year. Don't have even that many episodes. I think there's like maybe 13 episodes, but check it out if you want to. We also have an episode coming up with me and him, me and T Rich. We reunite and we talk about starting the podcast and all the things around the podcast. We also have another episode coming out talking about being a coach, or the episode title is Disabled Coach, but he was my assistant coach. On one hand, he was my assistant coach. On another team, he was my star player. But look forward for those episodes coming out. But as always, until next time, let's roll.
Hey, this is Jenny Heaney, and you're listening to the Let's Roll podcast with host Double R. Make sure you're following us on all of social media. Find the links below in the description or at theletsrollpodcast.com.